My brother took my $85,000 with my parents' blessing. Then he sent it to the wrong person. It wasn't just cash. It was my entire savings. Every penny I'd meticulously squirreled away for the down payment on that little bungalow by the lake. The one I'd shown my parents a dozen times in brochures, tracing the lines of the porch swing, the open kitchen I'd picture myself baking in. $85,000. Gone. Not lost, not spent on some wild, impulsive trip, but taken. And the sickest part? My parents, the people who raised me, who were supposed to be my rock, gave him their blessing. "He needs it more, honey," my mom had said, her voice as smooth and unconvincing as cheap silk. "You're young, you can earn it back." Earn it back? I was 28, not 18. I'd been working my tail off for 10 years, sacrificing nights out, new clothes, anything that wasn't strictly essential, all for that little slice of quiet. My brother, Mark, he was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He drifted through life on a cloud of charm and his uncanny ability to look you dead in the eye and tell you whatever you wanted to hear, regardless of its truth. He'd always had a knack for money, not in a way that involved actual work, but in a way that involved other people's money. Small loans that never got repaid, investment opportunities that evaporated into thin air, always leaving him smelling faintly of desperation beneath the expensive cologne. He'd sworn up and down he had this foolproof plan this time, something about a tech startup, a guaranteed 30% return in 6 months. He'd presented it to me, not as a request, but as an inevitability. "Just stake me, Sarah. This is going to be the one. We'll all be set." I'd listened, my stomach twisting with unease. I knew Mark. I knew his track record. But he was my brother, and he had this way of making you feel guilty for not believing in him, for being the practical one, the one who actually had responsibilities. I tried to explain to Mom and Dad. I'd sat at their gleaming mahogany dining table, the same one where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday, and laid out the facts: Mark's history, my own careful saving, the real estate market in my desired neighborhood. They'd nodded, their expressions placid, almost bored. "Sarah, dear," my dad had started, his tone patronizingly gentle. "Mark's made some mistakes, yes, but this time he seems so sure. He's your brother. Family helps family." My mom chimed in. "He's our son, Sarah. We can't just turn our backs on him. And you've always been so responsible, so sensible. This is just a small bump in the road for you. Mark's in a real bind." A bind he'd created for himself, repeatedly. But my words, my careful, logical arguments seemed to bounce off them like pebbles off a fortress wall. They were already decided. They were choosing him, as they always did, over me. The sting of that realization was a cold, sharp jab. Then came the actual request. Mark, at my apartment, smelling faintly of that expensive cologne, his eyes wide and earnest. He'd been so convincing. He painted a picture of our future, of me living in my dream house, of him, successful and happy, showering our parents with gifts. He even threw in a story about needing it for an emergency, a vague crisis that he couldn't quite elaborate on. He'd looked at me, his hand outstretched. "Just sign this, Sarah. It's just a loan. I'll pay you back double, I swear on Mom and Dad's lives." I hesitated. My gut screamed no. Every rational thought I possessed screamed no. But then I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of panic, that desperate hope that I would be the one to bail him out, again. And the thought of my parents' disapproval, the silent judgment, the disappointed sighs, weighed on me. So I signed. I signed away my bungalow, my peace of mind, my trust. He took the check, a bright, cheerful smile spreading across his face, a smile that felt like a betrayal in itself. He practically skipped out of my apartment. A week later, the first real crack appeared. Not the crack of my shattered savings, but the crack in the facade of Mark's grand plans. I'd received a curt, impersonal email from a law firm I'd never heard of. It was addressed to me, but the content was utterly baffling. It mentioned a substantial sum of money, a large inheritance, and a legal dispute. Confused, I reread it. It talked about a beneficiary, a Mr. David Miller, and an irrevocable trust. My heart started to pound. This had to be a mistake. I forwarded it to Mark, asking if he knew anything about it. His reply was immediate and dismissive. "Yeah, just some legal stuff, Sarah. Don't worry about it. It's all handled. Handled? That didn't sound like a man who was about to repay me double. Then the phone call started. Not from Mark, but from strangers. An elderly woman, her voice trembling, asking if I was Sarah Jenkins and if I'd received a package meant for her. A man, gruff and impatient, demanding to know when I'd be transferring the funds. Each call was more confusing and unsettling than the last. I felt like I was being drawn into a vortex of someone else's problems, a problem that seemed to have a direct link to my $85,000. It wasn't adding up. Mark had sworn he was investing it, not sending it off to some unknown beneficiary. I started digging. I contacted the law firm. The paralegal, a Miss Thompson, was polite but firm. She confirmed that a large sum, deposited into a specific account, was indeed designated for a Mr. David Miller. She wouldn't reveal the exact amount, citing client confidentiality, but the context of her conversation, the hushed tones, the legal jargon, all pointed to something significant, something far bigger than my bungalow savings. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so ugly it made me physically ill.
I remembered Mark mentioning a distant relative, someone he'd barely known but who had a reputation for being eccentric. A recluse, he'd called him, with no close family. Mark had always had a nose for opportunity, and this sounded like his kind of opportunity. He hadn't invested my money. He'd used it as a placeholder, a bridge, to get his hands on something else, something much bigger. The foolproof plan was a lie. The emergency was a fabrication. He'd lied to me, to my parents, to everyone. And my parents, blinded by their devotion to their golden boy, had enabled it. They'd actively facilitated his deception. I confronted Mark. It wasn't a shouting match, not at first. It was a quiet, tense interrogation in his trendy, minimalist apartment that reeked of new money and old habits. His usual charm was strained, his eyes darting away whenever I pressed him. I laid out what I'd found, the emails, the paralegal's hints, the calls. He stammered. He deflected. He tried to turn it back on me. "You're overreacting, Sarah. It's complicated." Complicated? I'd given him my life savings, and he'd apparently gambled it away, or worse, laundered it through some obscure trust fund. "Where's my money, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. He finally cracked, a flicker of the old Mark, the desperate, cornered Mark surfacing. It's tied up. There was a mix-up. I sent it to the wrong account. The trust thing. It's Mr. Miller's, but the paperwork got fumbled. It's going to take time to sort out." The wrong account? My voice rose, the humiliation of his confession, of my own gullibility boiling to the surface. "You sent my $85,000 to the wrong person, and that's how you think you're going to get rich?" He flinched. "It's not like that. It's an inheritance, Sarah, a big one. David Miller was supposed to get it, but I intercepted it. I thought I could redirect it. It was meant to be for me too, in a way, some old family connection." The sheer audacity of it. He hadn't just taken my money, he'd used it as a stepping stone in a plan to steal someone else's inheritance. And my parents? They'd given him their blessing to potentially commit fraud. The weight of their betrayal, combined with Mark's, was crushing. I felt a chilling calm settle over me. The panic and hurt were still there, a raw wound. But beneath it, something else was hardening, a resolve. "So you didn't invest it," I said, my voice flat. "You used it to try and steal an inheritance, and now you've messed it up, and my money is gone." He looked away, fiddling with his designer watch. "It's not gone, it's just delayed. And look, Sarah, I'm sorry about the bungalow, I really am. But this is bigger than that. This is life-changing money, for all of us." "For you," I corrected, the word a cold shard of ice. "It was always for you, wasn't it? You never intended to pay me back. You never intended to do anything but take what you could."
"And Mom and Dad, they just let you." He finally met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw not just guilt, but a sliver of fear. He knew he'd pushed it too far. He knew he'd stepped on a nerve that wasn't supposed to be touched. I stood up, the small apartment suddenly feeling suffocating. The scent of his cologne, once a symbol of his supposed success, now smelled like deceit. "You sent my money to the wrong person," I repeated, the words deliberate. "My $85,000, the money for my future, and you think you can just sweep it under the rut?" He swallowed, his jaw tight. It's being sorted out. The lawyers are handling it. Are they? I asked, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. Because I have a feeling they might be about to get a lot more involved. And you know what, Mark? I'm going to make sure they do. I walked out of his apartment, leaving him standing there, the picture of a man who had just realized he'd made a very, very big mistake. The sting of betrayal was still sharp, but it was no longer debilitating. It was fuel. Fuel for a fire I was just beginning to ignite. I had nothing left to lose, and that, I was discovering, made me a very dangerous person. The silence that followed my exit was not one of defeat, but of a predator gathering its strength, its gaze fixed on its prey, already planning its next move. The money was gone, but the control had just begun to shift. The drive back to my apartment felt like an out-of-body experience. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, each one a tiny, mocking reminder of the life I'd planned, the life that was now in tatters. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I replayed Mark's stammering confession, his pathetic attempt at damage control. It's being sorted out. The lawyers are handling it. Lawyers, right. He'd fumbled a complex scheme of entitlement and theft, and now he expected the legal system, the same system that was supposed to protect people like me, to just magically fix his mess? He'd played me, played my parents, and ultimately he'd played the system. But the key phrase echoed in my mind. I sent it to the wrong person. It wasn't just the money, it was the calculated deceit, the casual disregard for my dreams, my future. It was my parents' complicity, their willingness to sacrifice my well-being for their golden boy. The humiliation of being told I was just young, that I could earn it back, while Mark was handed a blank check for his supposed surefire plan, gnawed at me. They saw me as the sensible one, the reliable one, the one who wouldn't make a fuss. They underestimated me. They always had, and that was their first, and soon to be, their last, fatal error. I spent the next few days in a state of controlled chaos. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a holding cell. Every corner held a memory of my bungalow dreams, the chipped paint on the windowsill where I'd imagined hanging fairy lights, the worn spot on the rug where I'd picture myself practicing yoga in the morning sun. Mark's casual cruelty had not just stolen my money, it had stolen my peace, my sense of security, my belief in fairness. I started digging deeper, not into Mark's vague claims about inheritance or trusts, but into the actual mechanics of his screw-up. I called the law firm again. Miss Thompson was polite, but her evasiveness was a beacon. She kept reiterating confidentiality, client privilege, but I pushed. I asked pointed questions about beneficiaries, about the process of fund disbursement. She eventually, grudgingly, admitted that the account designated for Mr. David Miller had indeed received a significant unexpected deposit, a deposit that was flagged due to an irregularity in its source. Mark hadn't just sent my money, he'd sent it to a destination that was already under scrutiny. He hadn't just fumbled, he tripped over his own greed and landed square in a legal minefield. The thought of my $85,000 sitting in some frozen, contested account, tangled in legal battles, made my blood boil. It wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. It was about accountability. It was about showing my family, and Mark most of all, that I wasn't just the sensible daughter they could manipulate. I was a force to be reckoned with. I started researching estate law, trust funds, beneficiary rights. Hours blurred into days. I devoured online articles, legal blogs, even borrowed a few textbooks from the local university library. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. Mark hadn't just made a mistake, he'd likely attempted to commit a form of fraud, using my savings as leverage to get his hands on someone else's rightful inheritance. And if the law firm was involved in flagging the deposit, it meant they were already aware of the discrepancy. They were likely trying to untangle a messy situation, and Mark's impulsive redirection of funds had only complicated things exponentially. The calls from strangers had stopped. That was a good sign, I told myself. It meant the immediate confusion had subsided, and the recipients of Mark's botched transfer were likely dealing directly with the legal fallout, not with a seemingly innocent middlewoman. But it also meant Mark was losing control of the narrative. He was no longer the charming schemer pulling the strings. He was a pawn caught in a game he didn't understand. Then a breakthrough. Tucked away in a dusty online forum discussing probate cases, I stumbled upon a thread about a contested inheritance involving a certain David Miller and a suspiciously large out-of-sequence deposit. The user, anonymously posting, mentioned a brother who'd been acting suspiciously, trying to expedite the inheritance.
The details were vague, but the timeline, the name, the underlying implication of familial interference, it all pointed to Mark. This anonymous poster, like me, was caught in Mark's web, and they were angry. I sent a carefully worded private message. "I believe we might have a mutual acquaintance involved in a similar situation," I wrote, specifically regarding an inheritance that was misdirected. "If you're open to sharing details, I'd be grateful." The response came within hours. The user, who went by Just Me, was incredibly forthcoming. They detailed how their uncle, David Miller, a reclusive man with few close ties, had recently passed away, leaving behind a substantial estate. Their own brother Mark had been acting as an intermediary, claiming to be helping sort out the inheritance. But Mark had a history of financial instability, and Just Me had grown suspicious when Mark suddenly became flush with cash, making vague pronouncements about investments and guaranteed returns. The crux of the matter was this. Mark had presented Just Me with documents that seemed to accelerate the payout, asking for their signature to finalize the process and assuring them it was a formality. They'd signed, and now, weeks later, the estate lawyers were investigating a significant unexplained deposit that had been made into an account not originally designated for Mr. Miller, my $85,000. Mark hadn't just sent it to the wrong person, he'd sent it to a trustee or an executor or someone who had the power to manipulate the disbursement of the estate. He had used my money to grease the wheels of his own fraudulent takeover. The betrayal was no longer just personal, it was criminal. Mark wasn't just a reckless gambler, he was a thief. And my parents? They had enabled him. They had condoned his actions by giving them their blessing. The image of my mother's placid face, my father's gentle condescension, filled me with a cold fury. They hadn't shielded him from consequences, they had shielded him from morality. Armed with this new information, I knew I had to confront my parents, not with anger, not with accusations, but with cold, hard facts. I drove to their house on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that used to be filled with warm family dinners and polite conversation. The air felt different now, heavy with unspoken resentments and secrets. My mother greeted me with a forced smile. "Sarah, dear, you're here. Mark was just telling us about his exciting new venture. Sounds like he's really onto something big this time." My father sat in his usual armchair, a newspaper open on his lap, though I doubted he'd read a word. "Good to see you, Sarah. Mark was just saying you're a bit stressed. He mentioned something about a small delay with your investment." The casual dismissal, the deliberate framing of my stolen savings as a mere delay with my investment, was galling. I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Mom? Dad," I began, my voice deliberately calm, even. "I need to talk to you about Mark, and about my money." My mother's smile faltered. My father lowered his newspaper, his eyes sharpening with a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Apprehension? Guilt? "Mark didn't invest my money," I stated, my gaze moving from my mother to my father. "He used it. He used it to try and intercept an inheritance that was meant for someone named David Miller. He directed my $85,000 into an account that wasn't his, and now it's tied up in legal proceedings because he fumbled the entire scheme." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. My mother's face paled. My father's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" my mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Mark said it was a complex investment opportunity. He said you were a bit worried, but he assured you it was solid." "He lied," I said, the word cutting through the silence. "He lied to me, and he lied to you. He told you he needed my money to help him secure a future. He didn't tell you he was planning to steal someone else's inheritance, or that he was using my savings as a down payment on his fraud." My father finally spoke, his voice gruff. "Sarah, Mark is your brother. He would," I interrupted, my voice rising slightly, the control I'd maintained for so long starting to fray. "He did. And you know what? He told you he was doing something shady, didn't he? He didn't come to you with a legitimate business plan.
He came to you with a half-baked scheme that involved taking what wasn't his, and you gave him your blessing. You told me you couldn't turn your backs on him. You told me he was in a real bind. My mother's eyes welled up. We trusted him, Sarah. He seemed so confident. He's always been good with money. No, Mom, I said, my voice softening but the underlying steel remaining. He's always been good at taking it, and you've always been good at letting him. You protected him from the consequences of his actions, and in doing so, you enabled them. You let him steal from me, my money, my bungalow. My father stood up, his face etched with a mixture of anger and confusion. Sarah, this is a serious accusation. Mark wouldn't steal from his own sister. He did, I repeated, the words firm and unwavering. And the law firm handling David Miller's estate is investigating a significant irregular deposit, a deposit that originated from an account linked to Mark, and my $85,000 is part of that mess. My mother gasped, putting a hand to her chest. My father looked utterly blindsided, as if the rug had been pulled out from under his carefully constructed reality. You mean Mark used your money to commit a crime? My mother stammered. He used my money to facilitate a crime, I clarified, the distinction important. He used my money to try and steal an inheritance, and it backfired.
Spectacularly. The realization seemed to dawn on them, slowly, painfully. My father sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping. My mother began to sob quietly, the sound choked and broken. But what about your money, Sarah? My mother finally managed, her voice thick with tears. Will you get it back? I looked at them, at their devastated faces, faces that had always represented safety and security to me. Now they represented complicity and betrayal. The sting of their actions was still a raw wound, but it was no longer the all-consuming pain it had been. It was a dull ache, overshadowed by something else, a cold, hard clarity. I don't know if I'll get it back, I said, my voice flat. But I know this. Mark is going to face the consequences, and you too, you're going to have to live with the fact that you helped him do it. I stood up. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. This was not the reconciliation I had once dreamed of, the one where Mark finally paid me back, where my parents saw the light. This was something else entirely. This was the beginning of the end of their illusion. I'm going to the authorities, I stated, my voice firm. I'm reporting what Mark did, and I'm cooperating fully with the investigation into David Miller's estate. I owe it to myself, and I owe it to David Miller. My mother looked up, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Sarah, no, you can't. Think about what this will do to him, to our family. Our family? I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You mean your family, the one where Mark is always protected and I'm always the sacrifice. That family is over. And you, I looked directly at my father, you taught me to be responsible, to be dutiful. Well, this is my duty, to stop him, to make sure this never happens again. I walked out, the door closing softly behind me, leaving them in the ruins of their denial. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It was the end of a day, the end of an era. As I got into my car, the weight of what I had done, of what I was about to do, settled on me. It wasn't just about reclaiming my money anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about stripping away the facade of my family's carefully constructed normalcy and exposing the rot beneath. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal jargon and hushed conversations. I filed my report, detailing Mark's actions with chilling precision. I spoke with investigators, with estate lawyers. They were surprised, even a little awestruck by my detailed knowledge of the situation, a knowledge I'd painstakingly acquired. The lawyers for David Miller's estate were particularly interested. They confirmed that Mark had indeed attempted to divert a significant portion of the inheritance into his own accounts, using my funds as a temporary placeholder. He'd been sloppy, leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs.
And now that trail led directly to me, not as an accomplice, but as a victim who had become a witness. My parents called. They pleaded, they threatened, they wailed about reputation and family honor. I didn't answer. I couldn't.
Their words were like the hollow echoes of a past I was rapidly shedding. Mark, on the other hand, was in a panic. He'd gone silent, his usual bravado replaced by fear. I received a frantic, uncharacteristic text message from him. "Sarah, please, we need to talk. I messed up. Badly. They're freezing everything. The lawyers, they're going after me. Please don't do this. I'll give you your money back. Just name the price." The price. He finally understood that my money had a price, and it wasn't just the amount. It was the trust he'd shattered, the dreams he'd crushed, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. I stared at his text, a dark smile playing on my lips. The tables had turned. The power had shifted. He was no longer the one holding the reins. He was the one begging for mercy. I didn't reply to Mark's text. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Miss Thompson at the law firm. "Miss Thompson," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I understand there's an investigation underway regarding the misdirected funds from the David Miller estate. I have information that I believe will be crucial to your case, specifically about how those funds were obtained and the identity of the individual who orchestrated the redirection, as well as the source of a significant portion of the funds used in that scheme." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. My brother, Mark Jenkins, is the one who facilitated this, and I have proof. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then Miss Thompson's voice, no longer polite, but sharp with professional interest, replied, "Miss Jenkins, please come down to our office immediately. We have a lot to discuss." The drive to the law firm was different from the drive home from Mark's apartment. There was no blur of regret or self-pity. There was a focused determination. The humiliation had been a catalyst, the silence a period of intense preparation, and the control Mark had wielded was now a phantom limb, a memory of a power that was no longer his. As I walked into the imposing glass building, I felt a surge of quiet triumph. My revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be precise, calculated, and absolute. Mark had sent my money to the wrong person, but I, Sarah Jenkins, was about to ensure he was sent to the right place. And the realization of that, the dawning horror on his face when he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake, would be the sweetest revenge of all. The game was far from over, but I had just made the winning move. The quiet hum of the law firm's lobby was a stark contrast to the internal storm that had been brewing within me for weeks.
Thompson led me to a conference room, the kind with polished mahogany and a table that probably cost more than my entire apartment. She was businesslike, her expression professional, but her eyes held a new kind of intensity, a recognition of the seismic shift I represented. She laid out the facts, not as a confession, but as a meticulously documented case of attempted fraud. Mark's scheme had been audacious, almost impressively so in its sheer audacity. He'd approached the estate lawyers posing as a trusted associate of David Miller, attempting to fast-track a substantial portion of the inheritance, claiming it was for urgent liquidity needs of beneficiaries. He'd presented fabricated documents, assurances of swift disbursement, all while channeling the funds through a series of shell accounts. And then, in his greed and haste, he'd redirected a large chunk, my $85,000, into an account he thought was secure, a holding account for a key part of the estate's assets that was already under the watchful eye of the estate's trustees. He hadn't just sent it to the wrong person, he'd sent it to the person who could expose him most effectively. "Your direct involvement, Miss Jenkins," Miss Thompson said, her voice crisp, "while initially appearing as an innocent transfer, has now become crucial evidence. Your testimony, your clear documentation of the fund's origin and purpose before their redirection, provides an undeniable link to Mr. Jenkins' activities. The irregularities flagged by our firm were significant, but without the specific details you've provided, the full extent of his manipulations would have been much harder to unravel. He underestimated the scrutiny. He underestimated your awareness." She explained the legal process, the freeze on Mark's assets, the impending turn danger. It wasn't a rapid conviction. The wheels of justice, even when greased with irrefutable evidence, ground slowly. But the direction was set. Mark was facing not just financial ruin, but criminal prosecution. The money I'd worked so hard for, the seed money for my future, was now a piece of evidence in a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that would ultimately trap him. "And my money?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremors I felt internally. "The estate lawyers are working to disentangle the legitimate disbursements from the attempted fraudulent transfers," Ms. Thompson explained. "Given the circumstances and your cooperation,
there is a high probability that your funds will be repatriated. However, it will be part of the estate's resolution, which could take time. The priority now is securing the remaining assets and pursuing Mr. Jenkins. Repatriated. Not just repaid, but repatriated, as if they were returning to their rightful place. It felt like a victory, a hard-won, bloodless victory. I nodded, absorbing the information. The money was secondary now. It was the accountability that mattered.
I left the law firm, the late afternoon sun blinding me for a moment. The city, which had seemed so hostile and mocking just days before, now felt navigable. I drove home, not to my apartment, but to my parents' house. The house I'd grown up in, the house where my carefully constructed reality had been shattered. I didn't have a plan, not a concrete one. I just knew I had to see them, not as a supplicant, but as someone who had brought their own truth to light. The front door opened before I even knocked. My mother stood there, her face a mask of a grief I suspected was more for herself and her shattered illusions than for me. My father was behind her, his usual posture of relaxed authority replaced by a brittle tension. The air in the house was thick with a silence that felt heavier, more accusatory than the silence of the days before. "Sarah," my mother choked out, her voice raspy. We heard from Mark. He's in trouble, deep trouble." My father stepped forward, his gaze intense. "He said you reported him, Sarah, that you're cooperating with the authorities. Is that true?" I looked at them, at the familiar comfort of their living room, the framed family photos on the mantelpiece, photos of a family that no longer existed in the way I had believed. The anger had subsided, replaced by a profound weariness and a strange, cold clarity. "Yes," I said, my voice clear. "It's true. I told them everything. About Mark, about my money, about how he used it to try and steal from the David Miller estate. I told them how he lied to me and how he lied to you." My mother sank onto the sofa, her hands fluttering nervously at her throat. "He's our son, Sarah. Your brother. How could you do this to him? To us?" "He's your son," I repeated, the words devoid of emotion. "And he's my brother. But he's also a man who stole from me. A man who, with your knowledge and encouragement, attempted to commit a crime. You tell me, Mom, how could I not do this? How could I let him get away with it?" My father walked over to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "We made a mistake, Sarah. We supported him, yes. We believed in him, or rather, we wanted to believe in him. We never thought he'd do something like this, especially not to you. But you did think he was capable of something shady, didn't you?" I pressed, my voice gaining a little of its edge back. "You told me he was in a real bind. You told me you couldn't turn your backs on him. That sounds like you knew he was doing something questionable, something that required your enabling. And you chose him. You chose to protect him from consequences, and in doing so, you enabled him to betray me." My mother finally broke down, sobbing openly. "We were trying to help him. He was our child. We couldn't just let him fall apart." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice rising, the control I'd worked so hard to maintain slipping. "What about my fall?"
What about my bungalow dreams that Mark shattered? Did you think about me then? Did you think about the fact that my own brother, with your tacit approval, stole my future? No. You were too busy protecting your golden boy, too busy preserving the illusion of your perfect family. My father turned from the window, his face etched with a sorrow that seemed genuine, but also, I suspected, laced with a deep sense of regret for the exposure, the scandal, rather than for the betrayal itself. "We didn't realize the extent, Sarah. We thought it was a business deal gone wrong, a loan, something he could fix. We never imagined this, criminal charges. It's devastating." "Devastating for you?" I scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping me. "What about me? My life was derailed. My trust was broken. And you sat here defending him, making excuses for him. That was the real devastation, Mom, Dad. Not the money, but the realization that the people I trusted most in the world would stand by and watch me be hurt because of your loyalty to him." I walked slowly towards them, my gaze sweeping over the familiar objects in the room,
each one is symbol of a past I was now fundamentally reshaping. Mark thought he was clever. He thought he could manipulate everyone. He sent my money to the wrong person, and that was his first mistake. His second mistake was thinking that you two would always shield him, that your love would be enough to absolve him of any wrongdoing. He was wrong, and so were you. My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, but her gaze meeting mine. What now, Sarah? What do you want from us? I paused, considering. I wanted an apology, a genuine one. I wanted them to understand the depth of their complicity, the damage they had allowed. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they would never fully grasp it. Their world was built on appearances, on maintaining a certain narrative, and I had just ripped that narrative to shreds. Now, I said, my voice low and steady, you deal with the consequences of your choices. You deal with the fact that your son is facing criminal charges because you enabled him. You deal with the fact that your daughter no longer believes in the perfect family you presented to the world. You deal with the silence, the whispers, the shame. You've always shielded Mark. Now, you have to live with the results of that shielding. And I took a deep breath, the air feeling cleaner than it had in years. I have to build my own life, without the illusions, without the deception, without the weight of your expectations and Mark's schemes. I turned and walked towards the front door. The clicks of their shoes on the hardwood floor followed me, tentative, uncertain. I didn't look back. As I opened the door, the cool evening air washed over me. The world outside was no longer a source of dread, but a vast, open expanse of possibility.
The money was still in limbo. The legal battles would continue, but the internal war was over. I had faced the betrayal, endured the humiliation, and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably whole. Mark had tried to bury me under his mistakes, but instead, he'd unearthed my strength. I stepped out into the twilight, leaving behind the suffocating familiarity of their home, and walked towards a future that was finally, blessedly, mine to define. The echo of the closing door was the sound of freedom.